Hey everyone, I'm Philippe Quint and welcome back to Quint channel. This is going to be the second part of QuintEssentials on most effective practice. I've gotten a lot of great feedback after I uploaded the first part of QuintEssentials, where we talked about the general rules of most effective practice. So I want to thank you for your comments. Let's quickly review those 3 steps. Concentration, finding your space, slow is fast, meaning the slower you can make yourself practice, the faster you will achieve results that you want. Today, for the second part, I'm very excited to talk about a very important subject, and that is how best to approach a new work. Needless to say, this could be quite an overwhelming experience. Opening that score for the very first time, I know, scary. So many notes, so many markings. How do we digest so much information without being frustrated? Starting a new work is a little bit like assembling a new piece of furniture. The only difference is that furniture usually comes with step-by-step instructions, and in our case, with a new piece, we sort of need to establish our own set of instructions in order to speed up learning it most effectively. First of all, it's okay to be frustrated. Of course, we want to be successful in our daily tasks, but when things don't always go our way, it is only normal to be disappointed. No matter how much time we practice, we don't just get better every day. And when setbacks take place, it is important to reevaluate your practice to see which part of it needs to be adjusted. For me, starting a new work is divided into 3 main components. 1. History. 2. Technical aspect. 3. Musical aspect. Now let's delve into all 3. Why is it relevant to know the history of the work and composer's background? Because it gives us an immediate perspective on what it is that we're about to start learning. Every little detail matters, as it can greatly impact our future interpretation of the piece. Where and when a composer was born will give you an idea of what to expect in terms of style of that particular era. And knowing when a particular work was written by that composer will give you an idea of what the composers were going through in their lives while writing those pieces. Love, relationships, natural disasters, conflicts, celebrations, big political changes all contributed to the mood of the many compositions that we're working on. So before we even get to that first page, let's pay attention to what is written on the cover. As an example, let's take a look at one of my favorite concertos, Bruch's Violin Concerto, which eventually became known as his Concerto No. 1. By the way, this is not a masterclass on a Bruch concerto, which I plan to do at some point. This is only an example to illustrate an approach. So here is my favorite edition by Henley. What does the cover tell me? Several things. That this is urtext, meaning that this is the closest source to composer's manuscript. Any closer, and that means that you actually know this composer in person. Gosh, I've always wanted to email Beethoven. Anyway, the next thing we see is that it's in a key of G-moll, G minor, which I think is a very interesting choice of a key, as it gives a particular color to the atmosphere of the concerto. Opus numbers is always a good way to keep the chronological order of the pieces in which composers wrote their compositions. It's also good for publishers. In this case, Opus 26 suggests that unless Bruch revisited this concerto at some other point, he was probably pretty young when he wrote it. We turn to the next page, and thanks to this lovely Henley edition, we have a nice little introduction about Bruch and about how this concerto was written and when it was premiered. So already saves us a little bit of time. Then we finally get to the first page, and the first thing that I notice is this writing that looks to be in German. Now, I don't speak German, but there is something that I immediately recognize, and that is the name of Joseph Joachim, one of the most prominent violinists of that era and a very talented composer in his own right. Not to mention him being Brahms's close friend and collaborator, and someone that has contributed to many of Brahms's violin and chamber works. So we know right from the start that Bruch went to seek advice from the very best. It was and still is a very common practice for composers to seek advice from a close friend violinist to help them through the process of navigating through the instrument if they're not so familiar with it. This brings us to step number 2, the technical aspect. First movement of Bruch is rather short. It's about 10 minutes in length and it's about 4 pages of printed material. Sure, we want to run it from beginning to end just to get the feel of the piece. But after those few times, this is when a system and strategy needs to kick in. After running the piece a few times, the technical challenges will pop up almost immediately. Let's circle the most difficult ones. Here they are. We've now located most of the hazardous places that could cause us some technical challenges. What's next? Now we need to assign practice time to those places. After running a movement a few times, I already know that for me the most difficult and challenging place will be this little cadenza at the end of the first movement. There are several passages there that are somewhat uncomfortable, and especially this one that goes very high on a G string and you're all alone, so you're completely exposed. So let's assign 30 minutes of slow practice towards this little section and this particular passage. Let's circle this one and let's give this one about 15 minutes. And let's give these two passages 10 minutes each. The time of these assignments, of course, needs to vary depending on the improvement. Let's say this original passage has greatly improved, so you won't need to spend 20 minutes on it every time. Hopefully and eventually you will be able to get it down to 1 minute, or sometimes just running it through slowly is sufficient enough. Same goes to all the other passages that we marked. After you feel that there has been an improvement to all the technical spots, let's move to the step number 3, which is the musical aspect of the piece. This is where we need to apply a technique that I like to call the magnifying glass. Here I'd like to stress that studying the work with your eyes is just as important as studying it with your instrument. When I give master classes, I often ask a student to sing along. You really don't have to be an American Idol or an opera star. This is purely so you can understand how the phrase functions, and somehow when we sing it in our heads, it gives us a much better idea how the phrase is built and where it's going. Plus, without instrument in your hands, it lets you concentrate on the smallest details. Once you have completed the 3 steps that we discussed in this video, it is time to move to the next level. Instead of assigning time to particular passages like we did earlier, it is time to assign times to bigger sections of the piece. Let's see which sections make most sense. I'd say that these sections divide pretty well. So at this point, you should know how much time you want to allocate to these sections. A big part of a musical aspect of any piece, especially if it's orchestral, concerto, or chamber work, is working with the full score. But this is something that we're going to save for another video. If you were able to keep up with this daily practice routine and system, then it's time to put all elements together, a little bit like jigsaw puzzle. I find it extremely important not to rush through the learning process of a new piece. And for those of you that are extremely patient, I'm not one of them, I would highly recommend keeping a diary of your daily practice. These will be particularly helpful when you go back to study this piece for the second time, and you will be able to look through the notes. Comment below with your thoughts, let me know which piece you're working on, how is it going, and thank you for watching.